Hello, Cardstack community. This is Chris C., the founding director of the Cardstack Project. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the card catalog, which is a very important part of end-user facing software that we're building so that people can see what cards have already been built by the community and be able to leverage those and create their own experience around the Cardstack universe. Last week, we had a conversation and a talk about GitChain, which is very low-level infrastructure about how we take cards and condense it and combine them and pack them and then anchor them on chain so they can be syndicated and synchronized across multiple nodes. This is now assuming that and those kind of back-end infrastructure, and to say, what does the user experience look like? How do we build up this catalog of cards that would hopefully one day replace what exists today in the App Store or on a Chrome store or something like that? So I'll begin by talking a little bit about Cardstack in general, about the concepts that we all need to understand. So when we talk about Cardstack, there is really three perspectives from three different audiences that we try to explain, which is, what does developers see when they see Cardstack? What does the end users see when they see Cardstack? And what do blockchains see? Now, I know blockchain is not a person, but blockchain is a network of people working together towards a consensus. So to me, that is an audience. That is a particular set of personalities and needs and wants we want to be addressed. And in general, what developers need to care about Cardstack, we talk a lot about building the hub, building different aspects of the plugins, but the truth is that our goal is to make sure that developers who are web developer, an application developer, JavaScript developer, sees Cardstack as an SDK, that they can build these new cards in an open source way. So they can use an open source library and build open source card, or they can use the open source library to build something maybe more proprietary. When they are built, these cards are delivered to an end user, and the end user use these cards to create their own cards. And these cards are not just about the app itself, but like, if I use a notes app to create a note, a memo for myself, a reminder, that thing, the thing that I jot down the notes in is the app, and then the note I make is the card. It's the thing that you would take a screenshot of. So you can imagine end user using these cards that's delivered by developers to create their own meaning, their own content, their own data, their own asset, their own action and history. And those are what we call my cards. Similar to my documents in a Windows machine, where it's all the stuff that you created over the time using the application that exists in your ecosystem, in your computer, in Windows Store, or whatever it might be. And then finally, what the blockchain sees is the software as a service, right? Because the idea here is that even blockchain at its core is a type of software as a services, right? You pay a small fee in gas and transaction fee, and you hope the blockchain will record your data, you record your transaction on the blockchain. You pay a small amount of money, and then you get this kind of permanent record on this amazing ledger and database. And cloud services are also software as a service. I subscribe for $1 a month or $5 a month, and someone will do a software service to provide a content management system for me. Or I pay $6 a month and someone will run a chat service for me. So these are all software instantiated, deployed to server, professionally managed, and in return of running the software for you, they charge you a fee for it. And the way we see this is that in the Cardstack ecosystem, the developers don't have to worry about the software as a service. The developer essentially bring the software to the user. The user say, hey, I have all these cards I want to use to build my digital life or my digital business. Can someone else run these software or these cards for me as a service? And that's what we call tokenized SaaS. Tokenized just means that the measurement of value, the distribution of revenue and reward to anybody who's contributed either services or the software, or maybe even recommendation as a type of lead generation, is all done through a calculation that's based on blockchain and tokens. So you can get partial credit for providing one card that someone used in larger workflow. So let's get more concrete. When we're talking about the overlapping of the end user wanting to use a set of cards and say, hey, I want to pick someone or a set of service provider to run the cards, what they're talking about is revenue, which is that I want to pay some service provider a certain amount of fee, either prepaid or postpaid or subscription or pay as you go, to do that for me. And that is how we get the reward to the developers of the tools, developer the cards, the developer the plugins, because their cards, their software are what the users are using. And without the user willing to pay for someone to run those services professionally, there will be no revenue. Without revenue, there will be no proportion of that revenue that will go to not only paying for the material cost of keeping lights on and providing storage, but also rewarding someone whose cards inspire someone to create a new artwork or create a new video because they're using this basic cards as an assembly of this digital documentary. So the ideal revenue and reward in our Cardstack ecosystem is a balance between wanting to make sure that the open source developer are given incentive to create new open source software, but also taking away the incentive to lock the user in. It's like, I now have to run one service that you're gonna put all your data onto my server, otherwise I won't be able to get paid. It will just be open source code on GitHub. And this token access created symbiosis between people who are willing to be service provider, answer the call, answer the email, be responsive, and developer who wants to iterate and improve the code. Sometimes they're the same people, a lot of times they're not. And the Cardstack ecosystem bring them together. So that's what the developer and end user and blockchain sees in terms of what Cardstack is going to do for them. But this is naturally not a new way of looking at the software business or the business of software on the internet. In fact, if you look at what Apple is doing, it's actually quite similar, right? The developers build their apps. There's an app for everything on the iOS SDK. And that's similar to the Card SDK. It provides the features. It provides common features that the developer don't have to build themselves. But once they build a feature, they can give it to the user who sees it and install it on their home screen. And sometimes that distribution is done through an app store so that you can either get in-app purchase or upfront purchases, and in some cases monetized through an advertising mechanism. But the idea here is the app store is kind of like the business model end of the Apple ecosystem, and the developer are actually the contribution of this variety of tools that user can go and see, hey, what are all the things I can do? It's not just what the thing that Apple can do for you, but also what the creativity of many developers finding new ways to address new needs as people move their lives in a mobile way. But here's the interesting thing. If you look at what the user sees on the home screen, if you buy an iPhone from the Apple store, the beautiful stores around the world, before you install any branded app like Facebook or Twitter, what you see is this home screen. So this is the default app that comes with it. Notice, other than maybe iTunes and stuff like that, there's no brands. They're all about what the thing is. This is an app to take a photo. This is an app to allow you to get the weather. This is the app to allow you to get the map. It's only after the users have learned how to use these tools do they say, demand that they install these branded app. I want the Facebook app, a Facebook Messenger. I want Google's Hangout. I want this app to do conferencing, and those are all branded. And that's actually a little bit in conflict of what the original vision of the App Store is. Because if you look at what actually goes into each one of these apps is these concepts, right? So, you know, the camera is thinking about photos and video. Using a camera app, you can create photos and video. You can also record screenshot in your Photos app. You're talking about your wallet, it's about both credit card that you can use for Apple Pay, but also boarding pass as you want to board the plane. Inside the news icon is article you want to read. Inside the to-do app is something that you want to track your task. The shows and the books and media objects, companies and attendees in your calendar. These are all things that are, you know, what people are thinking about, especially as you install more apps. It's like, hey, I would like to talk to this person. I have a thread with my contacts. Is that in iMessage or Messages? Is it in Facebook Messenger? Is it in WhatsApp? Is it in Telegram? Or is it in some other apps like Viber that I haven't touched in a long time? So this idea of the app ecosystem was really great when you first get the phone. But as you turn these proper nouns of books and health and home and files and camera into something more like these are common nouns into proper nouns like Facebook and Twitter, that mapping is what people are trying to do today. And that's what we call about app silos, which is the way that the apps forces you to think which network you're part of before you start interacting the thing, which are these cards that is now around. And the idea of cards are not new. When someone say, I want to take a screenshot of this article so I can share it, or take a screenshot of this document so that I can possess it in case the app gets deleted or my account gets revoked or something like that. Your camera roll, your photos is the most valuable thing because you can actually capture this point in time of the apps experience you have. And people do this all the time. I'm about to get on a plane. Let me go screenshot something on my travel app. And that's the power, I think, of the concept of cards, which is that end user really value and deeply care about the things they collect. As they interact with different things, they want to own it by PDFing it or emailing to themselves. And we want that to be how people interact, not just in terms of I'm making a card and this is a website or an app, but actually accumulating things over time like your document folder, or people use Dropbox. As you grow in your digital journey in your life, you get more and more stuff that's part of your collection. And that's really exciting. And I think this idea of My Cards is very much what we want people to do, to be able to use the open source tool to create meaning and then be able to track and save and archive and share the things that they do along the way without boundaries, without worrying about, oh, is my friend or is my contact in that network, can I share that with them? So let's drill down a little bit about what we are promising in terms of our concept of cards for end users. So cards are, as we've talked in previous talk before, ownable, which means that once you create a card, it's like downloading a file or PDF to your computer, you own them, and it's not because it's on the blockchain, it's because you possess it. And ownership is really about possession here. It's reusable. You can take a card, unlike a PDF, it's more like a Word doc when you download it, you can change the text fields in this editable document and use something that someone sent you as a template for something you sent to someone else. So this idea of cards are alive and they retain its source code, and it retains the ability to be edited, means that what you receive, oh, this is a really cool invitation card I just got, let me reuse it in an invitation event that I'm doing for myself. And cards are also interesting, right? Because much like your Dropbox folder or your iDrive or whatever, iCloud Drive, it's actually files in a file system, which means you can then type the name of the thing, name of the file, or type some string or some words as mentioned in these cards. And because they're documents, you will find them. Whereas if you were like, I want to find a photo I posted to this service or a note I taken in this Evernote clone, it's not clear how you would first figure out where the search engine is, go log on, and then search. So this idea of collecting this information in your own kind of like collection or your own hub allows it to be searchable. Card is also chainable. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a double entendre here. Chainable means that I can take a card that, let's say I fill out some form, I get someone to fill out some form of their address information, and with one click, I can create an invoice, copying that information and over. Because card has metadata, and those metadata can become input to some other things. But it's also that we can use the blockchain as a way to chain these cards together. When these actions get performed, register on the blockchain and trigger the next action, either a payment or a revocation or a confirmation. And in addition to that, cards are also verifiable because on the web, you keep typing the same information again and again, your name, your phone number, your email addresses. Cards allow you to take that information that you have verified. One site is like, hey, I've checked your email address. It seems good. Can you imagine them writing back to a card, hey, here's a verified email address by me, like Google. Next time, if someone asks you for the contact information, instead of typing it over, just present this contact card, and inside that is the verification message from Google and Yahoo or whatever service that's doing that. So this idea that cards can get enriched, almost like a passport, get more and more stamped as you go through different port of entry, and that builds up this verification that makes it more and more valuable. And this card being editable in version and accumulating value over time is quite powerful. And what I'm trying to say here is that this is very different than an app, right? An app, you can't really own the things in an app, you can't reuse, you can't really search within an app, and one app can maybe go to another app if you use, save to camera roll and use that, but really the data is pretty much locked in it, and so verification is very difficult. You end up redoing the same step over and over again. So something really powerful about cards once it becomes a unit of exchange between people and people and businesses. But let me talk a little bit about what cards are not. So a lot of people ask me, hey, Cardstack has this blockchain component. Are you storing all the cards on the blockchain? The answer is no. Simple reasons. People have lots of files on their computer. If I put every single entry, not just the actual text or the binary of your 4.2 megabytes, image on chain, that's way too big for 100 gigabytes is like a good size blockchain. It's that it's also very public. Like, I don't want all this information I own to be tell other people that I existed. However, it can be anchored on chain. And that's what the talk that we did last week is about. That you can take all your cards and say, I want to make a record that these 4,000 cards is owned by me, and anybody who has my key should be able to syndicate it and encrypt it or whatever it might be. But it's not stored directly on chain. It can be referenced for syndication purposes or syncing purposes. But the data is mostly files on your computer or on a service or hosting company that you trust or you run your own. So, as a corollary of that, cards are not limited in size and features. Cards are not just like a screenshot or Word document. It's actually an app. So, our idea of cards is that they're actually a mini application written using the web platform that has its own, rendering template, but also stores its own data. And with those data, it could be within the card, you store it locally, or you could be referencing something on the cloud. Let's say you uploaded a 4 gigabytes, video stream. You don't need that in your computer on the card. You can just reference it as long as the cards can go to a REST service, get an authentication, and then bring that information in. You can have a very rich experience with the card with playing this 4K video. But the card itself could be owning all the data in the bundle, storing all in Git would be what that's equivalent to, or it could reference information on the cloud or on the blockchain or on other type of decentralized storage. So they're not limited by size and feature because they're fully functional app. Using a blockchain Ethereum term, cards are Turing complete. Like they have the programmability of a full application, except they exist on the edge of the network, not in the blockchain. And finally, cards, because they are programmable and because they have this template and logic and connectivity and API access, because they're apps, they're not dead. They're not like email, like, oh, let me email this to myself, and it's like out of date. Like you email yourself a boarding pass, the gate change is not going to update. Or like, oh, let me take a screenshot of this receipt in case someone is going to give me trouble for not paying for this thing. Well, that information, that screenshot, you can't go and click on it and trigger a refund. A card can have a refund button and use the information on the receipt to trigger something. That's why cards are so powerful. So when we think about building cards, it's very easy to say, hey, let's just go build a bunch of cards and build this kind of undifferentiated feature set. We want to know that the Card SDK, which is the underlying shared infrastructure for card, is strong enough to allow us to build many different types of cards. Like the same thing in the home screen, right? Apple, it was radical that on one iPhone, the first one, it is a personal messaging device, like an email device. It is a web browser. It is a personal digital assistant that keeps track of calendar. It allows you to watch video and listen to music like an iPod. That was crazy. How can one device with one screen do so many things? It used to be that people have different devices for each of those functions. The same thing with Cardstack. We think the idea of card and Cardstack can satisfy almost all use cases that you can imagine that you can do on an app, on a desktop, on the website. And to prove that, we built many very different type of application as test application as a way to not only test our SDK, which is our iOS SDK, the ability to build apps, we build cards instead. And one of which is the Card Folio. We built a cryptocurrency tracking explorer wallet app so we can see if the concept of cards can allow to encapsulate wallets and addresses and transaction history and portfolio and exchange rates and all that stuff to allow you to have a very cohesive experience like a great portfolio tracker that understands crypto. And if you make a transaction to automatically update and propagate all the value of crypto in real time. That's pretty cool. So we built an asset type of application using the Cardstack SDK, and we released it in open source in January. But we also want Card to create content because content is the equalizer. Everybody can blog, everybody can write a post, everybody can write, express themselves. We want to see if cards can encapsulate content, not just article content, but images and videos and stuff like that. So we built something called Cardboard that has different types of content and encapsulated as cards combined together in this rich text experience where the image is a card and it's within the hero, and the hero is an article, that is also a card, and then the site that shows an index of all the images, or the article is also a card. So we'll get to that in a second. So that's pretty cool. We built a content management system using cards, the SDK. We also work with a partner that's working with a music company, Warner Music and Warner Chappell, to build a registry to synchronize data around music rights. So information about the title of the song, who wrote it, who owns the copyright, where's the audio file, watermarking the file, all these kind of data management thing that people use expensive SaaS software like Salesforce.com or the industry equivalent of that. We want to show that we can do that as well. And this is also something that we build to make cards encapsulate some data and forms and fields and editable and version and request permissions and deal with access control. Can you see this field? It depends on whether you are high enough level of a VP, and I'll give you access to that field. So data application built on cards. And when we do that, while we're building this application, we also discover or extend the Card SDK to support the type of feature we believe should be shared across all application developers building on top of cards. So when we're building the asset management system, we improve our plugin to Ethereum. So we can index not only on-chain transaction in Ethereum, but also other type of activities and being able to go back and correlate exchange data, exchange rate data in plugins and do that in a synthesized way. So we release some plugins related to that, but also firm up the way our plugins work across the cloud and blockchain. For the content management kind of project we did, and we released the source code on Cardboard around the time of EmbedConf in March, we improved the edges, which are the standard editing tools, the standard versioning tools, standard configuration tools that we provide so you can configure a card by clicking on it, almost like going to get info or properties on your Windows or Mac machine and tweaking it. And those capabilities are part of the experience. Every card get it, so you don't have to go do it yourself. So this little dialog box that allows you to edit the text, show the choose the variants of it, that's part of the edges. So we call it the 4 edges design system. So as we build a content management system, we're creating these kind of properties, editing edges, which will be used not only for content, but also for data applications. And then as we crunch a lot of different types of interrelated data for the people who understand database development, all your joins and relationship and entities. That helps us understand what schema is. So Cardstack is fundamentally a schema-driven model. So we know the type, what is an asset, what is an account, what is a person, what is a invoice. These are all concept we understand. And once you know that something has a certain shape, a certain required field, invoices has a amount due and a date, then you can start chaining things together. Click a button and pay this invoice. And you don't need to have that payment card inside the invoice as long as they both exist in the Cardstack universe. Recognizing each other's schemas allow us to chain the card together, as I mentioned earlier, to create those workflow that makes it so you don't have to log into 16 websites to just get something done or get a bill paid. So we learned a lot about schema, and we're doing some major revisions right now on the schema infrastructures to encapsulate what we believe the right SDK for developer would be. But while we're building up the SDK, and that's the majority of work, and it's not very visible work, right? It's like helping improve the stack by building these end-user-facing applications on top, like Folio, Cardboard, and dotBC registry. But what we get along the way is also this other thing, which is that we're now collecting a set of cards, a set of these reusable components that are a consequence of building a portfolio system. So we have the portfolio that will sum up everything that you own across all your wallet. We have a wallet that's mapped to a particular key and address, and we have transaction, which is on-chain record that we reflect that allows us to figure out when something happens, when you got some currency in and currency out. And that obviously works for crypto asset, but can also be extended to non-crypto asset, just having the transaction go to an e-banking system as a backend versus going to a blockchain. When we're building a Cardboard system, we have a concept of a site and an article, right? And certainly the image itself is also built as part of that. But the great thing is that if I ever need to insert an image, for example, in the registry to model cover art, like the album art, it actually uses the same image card. So all the image upload and permission, it's shared across all of these applications. So while we build these test app separately and release them in an open source way separately, underlying we're building this cohesive catalog of these 9 things. It's in fact a lot more than that. We also have to understand what an organization is, who can log in, what's a membership, and then in the dotBC application we do a lot of approval someone to see a field, approval someone to accept a change. And that's all kind of deeply ingrained in the schema system and is reusable across. Now obviously the UI can change, can be skinned and themed, but the basic idea of this concept is what we're collecting, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about building up this card catalog. So this is just the same view of what we looked at before. The apps that Cardboard, Folio, dotBC registries are actually just cards. There's a top-level card called site, and that site includes the underlying article and images and a list of them. There's a Folio called Portfolio card, which is you can go to the URL and go to the root of the website, but inside that, it embeds wallet transactions and assets. And then this board, which is a dashboard of songs, can actually include within it the organization request and approval and other music metadata related to it. So we see this idea of cards composing from the low-level object as they wrap and wrap and wrap, and eventually that becomes the app that people know about. But cards are the building blocks, and they're truly like Lego blocks. Once you build it from parts, those parts become a whole component. You can add a new room, add a new wing, or add a new propeller to your Lego creation. So, as we look at our code base, we see the accumulation of both containers and cards that are all built on top of this common Card SDK, this common development toolkit with very different features building on top of it, from content to data to cryptocurrency. But as we expand the scope of what we want to do in Cardstack, one of the things that is crucial as almost like the animal kingdom versus the plant kingdom, we believe that cards has two modes that it always goes into. Card can be at rest, so it's something that records some truth today, and you can collect it, and articles that you collect and do. But they can also be in motion. I'm submitting an article for this competition. I'm requesting you to invite me through a membership to your organization. I am requesting you to send me this money to this wallet. I am signing for this particular transaction, and then I will pay you after that. So this idea of message and forms and request and approval is actually the really interesting part about cards. Because cards are composable from the bottom up, they can exist in what look like a website. Look like static, you double click on it, it opens up. But it can also get attached, like attachments in email streams. So message going back and forth. So the same form, so let's say we create I don't know, some job application form. You can go back and forth and like try to chisel it and get it right. And all that time, you're actually version controlling that. It's almost sending back with a life coach, going back and forth with some application for award. And by the time you're done, like 45 emails later, you get a perfect article or write-up or something like that. This idea that cards can participate in this organizational workflow is extremely important to us. And the challenge we had is that we can't really build this kind of workflow system until all the stuff to the left, the site, the board, and portfolio exists. Because a flow, the thread that coordinate all this back and forth, is actually a type of page, right? It's just that it has this additional characteristic of queuing and appending and sending and security. But it's really exciting now that we have opportunity with the basics Card SDK capability to start working on flow, message, and form. In our Q2 planning meeting that we had in person, we were mostly focusing on what is a new schema for message and forms and flows, and we're well on our way of turning that type of interface that we have been custom building into a form that you can drag and drop and create a form, and then create workflows just by stitching different things together. So very exciting stuff coming along with Card in Motion. So fast forward a little bit, what we want to be able to do, and as we learn about the capability, is to be able to bring more and more the capability that we were building within the card, the application domain, and syncing it or collapsing it into the Card SDK. For example, you always want to select an image from your library in an article. So we want everything to be attachable or selectable, uploadable like an image. So it turns out that any card that says that I am like a media, I'm like a media item, can have a thumbnail, you can put it in. And that could be a real image, or it could be a computer generated, programmatically generated animation. That doesn't really matter. Once you implement the media boundary, you can do that. Same thing with asset account, whether that's a crypto asset or a account on a bank or financial institution. Once you have a balance and a date and some recent transaction, it participates in the rest of the Cardstack ecosystem very exactly. So you can count them and aggregate them. Same thing with triggering action, archiving, snapshots, mapping the metadata from one card to another, tracking the versions across them. Once this capability is in the Card SDK, which is the work we're doing now, taking what we've learned in building these cards in those test apps to create a stronger and more powerful SDK that gives you these features of media browsing, asset tracking, action chaining, receive snapshot metadata, and versioning all for free. Now, obviously, you have to map your data model and your schema and what you're trying, your business domain to it, but these are the things that's in the SDK. And with that capability, then we can start thinking about what the core catalog of cards would be. A core catalog of cards would be like an iPhone you buy from a store and you just boot it up without reinstalling it. What comes standard? What is out of the box? And these are the things that we see are important. As I mentioned, some of the roadmap feature and ballot features allow developers to not only distribute their features or their cards into the ecosystem, but also work with each other to plan what feature is more valuable, what new cards or not new features or functionality cards are most valuable community, and use the community spirit and the crowdsourcing idea to go and develop the idea of what these things ought to be. And I think that's a big part of what participating in the Cardstack ecosystem would be, is to collaboratively help roadmap what are the catalog of cards that would allow us to unlock the value in the world. So that's a little kind of summary of what we kind of left off when we were at our planning meeting. We wanted to come up with a partial catalog of what our core cards are and what are envelopes that like basic ideas, and use that as a way to guide the work going forward. So when we go back to the end user perspective, the key here is that the number of cards that you can use, invite cards and like approval cards, payment cards, can be infinite. But the key here is that once we have the first batch of core cards to the end user, they will be very able to get the idea of what a card that's ownable, reusable, searchable, and chainable, and verifiable is. And that hopefully will inspire them to say, hey, could you add this feature? But as a smallish team, as Cardstack, we really need the community of web developer to come through to help us build more cards that covers more. The same way Apple come up with 12, 14 apps in the App Store, and most of everything in the App Store, the tens of thousands in the first year and then the millions today, are not written by them. And they are all, however, written based on the iOS SDK. So our SDK is also designed to be very flexible. So it's not just an SDK for blockchain. We're not like, here's the SDK or the software development kit for building blockchain, unstoppable blockchain application. There's a couple of projects on that. Or this is an application toolkit to build application on our blockchain. We're like, well, what if I don't want to put it on a blockchain? I want to store in a cloud. So with our plugin system in Cardstack and our use of the Ember.js framework, which is very flexible, there's no restriction of what you can do. As long as you can call an API, as long as you can persist the data in Git, which you can put on GitHub on your computer or on Git chain if you so choose, you have a lot of flexibility when you do. Card SDK is also both a front-end technology and a back-end technology. So when you create a card and you have a schema for a new type of, I don't know, like legal form, you can actually create a back-end that connects to hello sign or something like that. And that's all part of the packaging of the card. And it's not just a front-end technology. You can write JavaScript or TypeScript in the actual card itself. And that's actually quite unique. So when you deploy a card, you have the front-end stuff that is download the browser, but it's also something that's running the hub, which is a server that's providing that API access, and that's all bundled all together. Now, let's talk about what we try to avoid in designing the Card SDK. We don't want to lock you into a particular vendor. So let's say a vendor is providing a card for you to do invoicing, and suddenly one day they go out of business or decided that they're going to charge you 5% on every invoice process. It would be bad if all the data that you have in that invoicing system is locked inside their database, right? The same thing can happen to a blockchain. You build this amazing application on a blockchain, and then one day the blockchain got forked or got hacked, and then it doesn't work anymore. What happens to all your data? That's pretty dangerous. So what we want to do is to say, you can always keep a copy of what you put into the cloud. You can always keep a copy of what you submit in the blockchain on your own computer, on your own kind of repository, a file folder structure. So that allows you to recreate another environment, syndicate, and bring these invoices to a competing vendor to say, hey, I support the Cardstack invoice standard. Please bring all your invoices you've collected or downloaded or synced along the way and bring it to me. Same thing with blockchain. Let's take all these metadata records that register in this blockchain. Now that we're moving to a new blockchain, replay the history from the beginning. And that's why using Git, we're using this idea of version control at the file level so that we have the asset to be able to recreate these kind of global state, whether that's on a centralized database or a decentralized blockchain. So that's a very important part of defending against the possibility that a cloud service, a blockchain network may not be around forever or may not be trustworthy and reliable forever. So there's a defensive move for a user. And developer could also be able to use the same card and say, hey, I support 3 or 4 different blockchain. Oh, you don't like blockchain? I can save it into your cloud. And that expands the potential market of the great user experience that you provide. And the other thing is on the card deployment aspects. Yes, card has a front end, so it is basically a web application that you can go to and access, or widget they can embed within a web page. It has a backend, has an API, but it doesn't require a plugin. So a lot of the decentralized application requires you to download a piece of software, a desktop application. And that's because decentralization is really, really important, right? People really want to be able to self-sovereign, have their own thing. But that idea of requiring someone to download something like a Chrome plugin before they use something is really taking a lot of people who would love to experience blockchain firsthand to not be able to do that. I'm not saying that you cannot use a plugin. I just think that to introduce this idea of cards and card chaining and registering certain data on the blockchain, we should try to eliminate that. So Cardstack by default does not require a plugin. Now, if you're one of those decentralization maven and say, I want to run everything and own everything, Cardstack actually is just a Docker container. All the full node and all the databases can be run on the desktop. So we can actually package Cardstack desktop in the application, and that will become your on-ramp nodes. As you're your host, you're hosting your own data. But as a starting point, we want to introduce this idea that you can experience what Web3, or more accurate, what Web 3.0 provide without having to install software before you experience it the first time. Big part of our design goal. And we want to show the users what cards can do, but also developer how we build what we build, how they can extend this set of cards and say, hey, I like this article and site and syndication thing. I'm trying to do a podcast thing. I want to make a podcast card. Can I use all the rest of the infrastructure for searching and media management and file upload? They say yes. The idea here is that we don't expect developer to build entire app from scratch, the same way developer do not build a content management system from scratch every single time they get a contract. They use WordPress as a starting point. We want to do the same thing. We provide these kind of starter kits within content systems or data or asset management, and then use that as a workflow and use that as a starting point and say, hey, add your one feature, your one card. And that documentation is coming. I know a lot of people are asking me, especially in communities, like, why don't you guys have a documentation? So we have been collecting different parts of, how do we explain Cardstack across these dimensions. And this is just focusing on the Card SDK part. As you can see, between schema, linking, embedding, computing, relationship, routing, grants, API request chaining, metadata, snapshot, annotation, styling, variants, themes, animation, writer, hub, authenticator. There's a lot going on in the Cardstack hub and the Cardstack system and SDK. The same way there's a lot going on in iOS, but this is all that's necessary to do the basic stuff to be able to synchronize the blockchain and make other things happen. So we will put this stuff together so that you can learn from our experience of being our own guinea pig, building against our own SDK, building these beautiful apps and we have open source. And then once we have this SDK, we will then create a hosting service called card.space so you can play around with these things as end users. But developers can actually see and learn directly from very good examples, and our team is totally committed of having making not only blockchain quality documentation for other blockchain projects, but actually open source, JavaScript open source quality. We're very, very proud to have Jen Weber join our team, and she spearheaded a lot of work at the Ember Learning team. So thinking about how to teach the Ember.js framework to more developers, not just ones that's been in the ecosystem a long time. So her sensibility and her understanding of what is the right type and right depth at what time and what mode to bring this fairly complicated but totally sensible SDK to the development community is something that we're very much looking forward to. And she's prepared this beginning, and this will probably iterate a lot before it goes out there. But it's something we're committed to do once we feel like, okay, the API is not going to dramatically change. We have all the big ideas we want to do. Let's increase or build up the catalog by not only the work that we do internally here, but also with the broader open source community. Synthesizing this a little bit, we have the three aspects of this: what developer, what end users, and blockchain sees. We want to create hosting as the first really important business model, providing the tools that has been built within the Card ecosystem, not only from this kind of open source efforts, but also commercial and growth of the community, putting themes and variants of stuff like that together. That all gets bundled together. You host Cardstack, and then within your Cardstack, you can use any cards you want from the catalog. So the catalog does not require you to hunt and choose which app use it. It's one global catalog. Pick whichever one you want, and that's what you're going to use in your daily lives. And developer can add to it. And they add to it by learning about how to build the Card SDK, how to augment, how to create. And in some cases, if they're ready to go deeper into the SDK and create expansion and improvement on the core framework itself, not just building on top of this nice layer. Now, obviously, you can't do that on the iOS. You can only build within the iOS SDK. You need to be employed by Apple to make improvement to the SDK itself, to add new features for augmented reality. You gotta, be part of the Apple team. With this open source approach at Cardstack, we see most developer really interested in building on top of the SDK. But with what we see in the Ember community and the Node community we're part of, people quickly become like, hey, can I get deeper and make some fundamental performance or security or features improvement, ergonomics improvement for developers. It's a very exciting way of collaborating both above the line of what is considered the developer user space of the developer and also underneath in the framework space. So in summary, a lot of what Cardstack is doing is about portraying and ourselves as the synthesis of all these important ideas. But to do all these important ideas, we have to do very, very specific tasks. So for example, at the framework level, we are refactoring Card SDK to allow for multi-party workflow. So in the past, in the sample apps like Cardboard and Folio, you have one website that has one repository, and that's it. And there's permissions and login and authorization and grants and access control and stuff like that. But we want to make sure the cards can truly move between different workflows, different sites and different hosts and different hubs and still retain what a card is. And that's something that it's tricky, but I think we have figured out in our learnings from building all this different application what's missing. It's largely just allowing for version control across boundaries and knowing where the card came from. It's almost like the provenance and lineage of that. So we will use this new SDK, this new schema, this new metadata construct in the new sample apps. And that's one of the reasons we held off on the documentation a little bit, because we want to make sure that this new shape of the schema that is influencing our work on multi-party workflow exists first before we go and write a lot of text around that particular code example. As we kind of move out of the framework space into building the first set of this card catalog or this core cards, we're starting to migrate to a scenario-driven approach. It's like, imagine someone is trying to get a job and they have a card that's a job application and they send that over and then someone send it back and they negotiate an array and then an invoice or a contract. Like there's a lot of very specific use cases scenario that we're imagining, and we'll share some of that with the community to see what kind of use cases are. They're not what we're building. They're just, we want a community to build it. We want to have templates that allows people to do those type of workflow, but there's just a way for us to figure out from end to end, from the beginning to end, whether end users, whether they're standing as a person looking for a job or a hiring manager looking to onboard a new employee, what does that look like? And can that be done in a way so that if you do it without blockchain at all, it makes sense. And if you want to have blockchain for verifying identity, you can do that as well. So this is kind of some of the change in approach as we move above the framework layer into this kind of user space. We're using scenario as a way, and personas, giving users names like Daisy as a way to do that. You'll see some Medium blog posts around some of the scenario that's driving our forms and messages and flow work that we're doing. It's been very helpful to us as we debate, low-level technical detail, how to deal with permissioning. It's always easier to empathize with a person trying to get their job done. And then finally, the card flow, which is something we've talked a lot about in previous talk. We finally feel like we can put card in motion. The card space and the framework and the SDKs are finally good enough that we can attach the same card multiple times in the same flow and not have the application get confused. Like, which one are you talking about? So this idea of versioning and sequencing and mapping and copying some from one to the other, isolating, snapshotting, saving it, allowing things to be deleted, moving between people, organization. This is very much something that we finally feel like this framework is ready to do. We believe that card flow is going to be the main way that people experience card for the first time. As much as we want people to use Cardstack to build a new web app or new website, Web3 app or something like that, most likely people will be using Cardstack and the card flow system in particular to take something from one app or one dApp, lift it into this kind of conveyor belt, decide who you want to send it to based on either wallet or email address, ship it to them, invite them to this multi-party workflow, have you guys negotiate and figure it out, and then click OK and have it settle out either in a centralized database or on-chain. That layer is missing, right? We've got on the world of cloud, we get like IFTTT and Zapier, but that's mostly for automation that you can set once and have it repeat over time. It doesn't facilitate decision-making, approval requests, and negotiation. We believe that that basic infrastructure is really the core of business, and therefore I'm going to spend some time next week when we do the next weekly video to talk more about card flow and how the structure of card flow allow us to turn Cardstack not just into an application building tool, which is valuable, but as a workflow building tool. And workflows are basically the basic concept that business is made. And if we can support business and new types of business, boundaryless, flexible, low friction business, there will be a lot more people looking at Cardstack as a way to go beyond the enterprise data center or even the centralized SaaS service into a much more collaborative, open source way of building software and building value. So thank you very much.